session that keeps you between us and the beer or the TLC area and the snacks and everything else down there. And so after this session, we'll be seeing you down there as well. I'm Brian Brecken. This is Kenan Owens. We're both on the Management and Security Technical Product Management team. We are here to talk about System Center together with private and public cloud. So it's a fast-paced, moving kind of dipping into a couple of different scenarios, a couple of different areas to give you a sense of what we're doing, which is not just private, which is also public cloud. So we understand that we're doing not just investments, but how we talk about it, how we see the integration between those two areas, and how System Center is one of three main common themes that we have across the company when we talk about cloud all up. Common management being one, common development tools, and then also common identity in there. And we'll focus on common management with a twist around identity as well in this talk. We do have a mention as well, the common virtualization theme as well in there, but it's more of a foundational piece in there as well. So I'll start with, oops, I need to press the right button. So we'll do a kind of a session objective, key takeaways. These are, think of it as if you get this, you should be pretty okay with the talk. If you don't like the session objectives and key takeaways, what you're going to get with this talk, then I suggest that you really quickly find another session to go to, because this is really what we want you to come away with. We get an overview of System Center solutions and how they're used to help drive customer adoption of our cloud services across System Center, or across Windows Azure, as well as our private cloud scenarios. There should be partners and customers as well in there. Understand how System Center solutions today are used to monitor Windows Azure-based services. So we'll mention a few things about 2012 as well, but a lot of the stuff that we're demoing and talking about are things that are available already today and getting enhanced, and additional feature capabilities are being added in later versions, later technologies as well. Better together scenarios, that's kind of the topic of the whole talk itself. So key takeaways is to get an understanding and a view of what we offer across both private and public, because a lot of our talks, a lot of our sessions, a lot of our buzz and what we're talking about is around System Center and private cloud, basically. So this is to integrate the public cloud scenarios as well in there. When we look at what is the cloud, so I think this slide is not meant to be I'm not going to stay in here for 6 minutes or 10 minutes. It's more of looking at the middle section in there, so delivering IT as a standardized service. When we look at what we're doing with our software, we're developing our software, we're reaching towards how can we make sure that we don't provide context switching and management tools as soon as you go between different types of clouds. So when I'm monitoring, I'm staying within the same context. I'm taking my knowledge that I have from having, for example, Ops Manager on-premise for years, taking that into private cloud, taking that into public cloud, and not introducing a new way to do it. So integration and keeping you context aware and context kind of sensitive in there. The same thing goes for identity as well, delivering identity as not a service, but a way to access services, whether they be private, public, or just on-premise as they are today, in that sense as well. Management of VMs and management of services, I would say, as well. That's a key capability, key focus as we move forward into System Center 2012 and onwards, and how we manage hybrid scenarios across on-prem and public. You'll see some introductions, you've seen some in the keynote and some of the other sessions you might go to on like what our first steps are in there. But it's a lot of this is how we are investing in our products, where we're going, where we're taking this in this world really, around delivering IT as a standardized service. I think the key word in there is standardized for me. I like that kind of term in there. So we look at our 3x3, as we call it, on the service types or cloud types on the left-hand side, and then who provides that cloud. through customers, service providers, or hosters, or what we could mention as global providers in there. So with the Google Salesforce.com kind of scenario, you have a solution which is very much software as a service architecture provider. Slipping in a little bit into the PaaS environment with some of their capabilities in there as well. You look at scenarios such as the Amazon, where they're really, really good at delivering IaaS as a service or infrastructure as a service, VMs rolling up, being able to run VMs in their environment. But they're also getting into platform as a service, offering ready to install VMs, ready to install capabilities on top of their cloud services in that world. So they're flying at those kind of different levels on there. You look at the VMware components, really good on the infrastructure as a service capabilities across customers as well as hosters, being able to provide hosting providers with a good way to offer services to their customers, to customers and partners of theirs to really drive infrastructure, just outsourced infrastructure basically. You look at, of course you're going to miss this, but the picture of Microsoft being in there is like, do we really cover everything in there? So can we do everything in there? So of course we're both from the marketing team and of course this is a slide that you would see where say Microsoft will pop up everywhere on there. But what do we have under the cover there? Where we are really looking at what we have and what we deliver in there is the top corners in there, customer SaaS, and the customer is not really delivering SaaS on there. Service providers are really not in the world where they want to be delivering. We're not in that world in there. What we can deliver in these kind of buckets in here, we deliver a private cloud offering for infrastructure as a service for customers to drive themselves. That's our private cloud offering with Hyper-V, System Center, Windows Server, in there. In the service providers part, Microsoft delivers into the service providers a platform for them to use. Put a question mark in there because we're not really providing a multi-tenant scenario for them to use. So the offering that's in there, you might want to say that it's not as good as the other competitor that's in that space because we don't deliver on the multi-tenancy. But believe me, we are, that's a world we're looking at and so on. But that's the question mark in there. The global providers, PaaS. What's the PaaS global provider from Microsoft? Come on. Is it that late in the afternoon? So what do we deliver as a global PaaS provider? Thank you. I'm just checking out, be aware. So Windows, Azure, and the SaaS. What's the SaaS? Starts with an O, ends with 365. So Office 365 or BPOS. Anything else, like Windows Intune as well. Could be a SaaS provider. It's getting into the infrastructure providing as well. But it's looking at this from a cloud perspective. When we look at management, we're not looking at just infrastructure. We're looking at how can we do management across the different layers in here. May it be global providers from the Windows and Azure and Office 365, as well as the on-premise and the service provider environment. It kind of puts us in a little bit different perspective on, especially the management side, where we really want to enable that seamless experience, standardized delivering of IT, whether you're running applications on-prem, hosting providers, or in one of the global providers. Being able to do monitoring, being able to do provisioning, and other management tasks within a common environment is something we're really, really striving towards. We'll look at this from two different angles. When we look at how we are providing these services from System Center, we look at it through one way is the application owner or the service kind of consumer who consumes the services we're offering through our cloud. And the other one is the service provider, which would be the data center admin. These are especially interesting when you look at the private cloud and the hosting provider. The service provider in the other two scenarios would be Microsoft or the Salesforce or the Google applications and so on, of course. And you would only be a service consumer in that space. Just to level set on those kind of user pictures we are and how we look at that. So application owners, looking through the pane of a self-service portal, and looking through that pane of self-service portal and going all the way over to the right-hand side, the goal here is to consume and deliver IT as a service for the application owner. So this is not about managing all the applications and managing all the VMs and all that, but it's about how does the application owner go through this stack of having the IT tools. In the bottom of this stack, their IT tools are doing really technical things, provisioning, creating fabrics, provisioning new disks and drives and all that, installing the OS, configuring components and all that. The idea being that the self-service portal, the further left you get, the more abstract you're getting away from those low-level tasks. The way that I consume as a service consumer, or a Windows, Azure, and Office 365 service, you heard me almost say Google, right? That was close. The way that I consume that service is I really don't care about how they're running that in the back end. The same thing here, the application owner, I need to install and configure a new app. I don't really care where that VM is running or where that database is running at. I just need to get to my application and run my VM and run my application basically. So the abstraction layer goes from the service itself all the way up to the self-service portals in some cases. When we look at IT as a service, there are 5, or including identity, you might maybe make it 6, kind of services or components that we play around with. At the bottom of the layer, you have services we need to deliver in a cloud, whether it be private or public or a mix of hybrid environments where you have database applications, you get access to data, and even the OS running on top of it. You see a pipe kind of going up to the top to the self-service capabilities. So here is the way to deliver self-service for those end users to get to the bottom section. In order for us to deliver self-service, we need to be able to monitor, we need to be able to protect, we need to be able to provision services and applications as well as VMs in these cloud scenarios. The interesting piece comes when you're talking about provisioning VMs. Is it a VM in the private cloud? Is it a VM here? The way that we define this is looking at it as a service or as an application, right? I am consuming the HR application. At the self-service layer at the top, consuming IT as a service is about consuming the service itself and not about consuming the VM or consuming the app. It's consuming the end service. That could actually be running, as you'll see in some of the demos, that could be running in a mixture of different clouds. Some part of the app is in Windows Azure. Another part of the app is in a private cloud. A third part, it might not be in a cloud at all. It might be a VM or a physical machine running in the infrastructure today that you might be moving out somewhere. But around that, in order to create this, we get process automation, service management as a layer on top of these services so we can really automate these things. Because if we need to go in and do these, provisioning, monitoring, protection, we need to do activities each time a new user needs a new VM or a new application or a new thing that they need to deploy. If you don't have automation on there, it just becomes more people doing the same job underneath the covers, just abstracting it in the layers. By automating things, we're taking away tasks that are duplicated, that are repetitive, that make it just easier to create a kind of a service as an IT as a service driven model. Not do the same thing over and over and over again. So if you look at different types of cloud scenarios, so how do we deploy these services / applications? Come on. One service, you run them in either one of the 3 silos. Service just on-premise, in the hoster, at a global provider. Those are 3 different types of service that you would run. And those are kind of common today. That's what we you could say that that's where we are today in this scenario. Most of the services running on-premise, internal data centers, and the others will be selected services running in the cloud and so on. The interesting capabilities come when we look at the hybrid scenarios between the different type of clouds. And if you look at service number 5 up there, so between Windows Azure and an internal data center, that can be multiple ways of doing a split service and application. So example number 1, you have an application front end living in Windows Azure, but your database lives in on-premises. Like the App Fabric Service Bus, for example, is a way to do that kind of thing. You might have a second scenario, which I'm going to show in a demo later on, is a scenario where you have an application running on-premise, but the identity provider and identity and authentication services and other things running in the cloud. So the scenario of making it hybrid, there is just not one scenario. If we would put all these in, we'd probably have 30, 40, 50 different types of scenarios that are applicable and actually useful in a way that we deliver IT as a service. Not all of these are like super easy to do. Today, not all of these are one-click management, and we can't manage all of these scenarios today, but we definitely are going that way. We're definitely looking at how can we get even the worst of the worst of these scenarios, which is like mapping up all of the 3 different providers into one way to look at it. The only way that we can go in and do management and really give you a cohesive look across this is to look at how can you manage this from a service or an application layer. So how do I monitor a service that's running in any of these 7 different models? If I'm trying to get down to like the nitty-gritty details of the underlying fabrics and all that, we start at the service level, we define the service model that looks at where do we run the different components, where do we run the different parts of the service, and that way we can actually provide, at least today, a monitoring capability on top of this. We'll see, Kenan look at some of the provisioning capabilities, at least for the Windows Azure internal data center scenarios of how can I provision a service across on-prem and cloud. And how can I do that with on-prem and hosters as well going forward. So we're really looking at a few of these scenarios, and nailing a couple of them would be easy to do today. Nailing all of them is, we're not all there, and there's no provider out there that does all of these all up. So I think if you've seen any talks around clouds and so on, you've seen this or a similar taxonomy slide, just a slide of saying who manages what and how do you manage things across these different cloud services. So on-premise, you manage basically everything. On the infrastructure side, it says other manages virtualization, server, storage, and networking. It's still the IT department within the organization most of the time that manages this, but it's abstracted. You don't have to do one tool to do this. We're abstracting this as much as possible away from the specific tools to do fabric management, to do SAN management, and so on. Really trying to simplify it and standardize it. The more you walk out to the right-hand side, the more standardized the delivery is. Okay, if you go all the way to the software as a service, you're not really managing the applications any longer either. That's managed by somebody else, but there's one thing that actually goes across this, and the application at the top is what your end users will be accessing. And what you need to monitor and where you need to look at, how am I providing this as a service to my business, is at the top level, at the top layer. So if you look at the first common that we look at before Kenan looks into common management, the common identity in this space is that wherever I host my service, I need to make sure that my users get access to it. It's pretty worthless anyway, otherwise, right? This is about service consumer. How am I consuming this? My common identity across this, all of the pillars can leverage the on-premise AD in different ways. right? The further you get to the left-hand side, the more I'm using technologies such as federation to get there. The on-premise and the infrastructure as a service, a lot of that could actually be using just a domain join machine, the classic Windows integrated authentication. You're looking platform as a service, software as a service, using the platform as a service to host applications and so on. We're using federation and ways to extend our on-premise AD. We're not investing. The way that we're doing investments in these platforms is not by creating new silos of identity and identity management in each one of these. We're extending what you have in on-premise AD with technologies such as AD federation services based on standards such as SAML 2.0. That's the way that you want to go forward. That's the way that you can extend identity and really leverage current investments in that world. So let's look at some examples of that one. Slide that you can take away. In the common identity platform that we are talking about, there are a bunch of technologies in there. The two most important ones, which are kind of new and kind of the way that you can do extension to the public and public PaaS and public SaaS providers is through the AD Federation services in the middle. So AD Federation services provides you with a way to transform on-premise Windows integrated logins to become SAML-based logins or web services, federation, web services, trust-based logins to other providers, right? You have Windows Identity Foundation, which is the other service, which other component in there that's important. Because with Identity Foundation, we are enabling the developer community to start thinking about and start developing applications that are identity aware, and I would almost like to call it cloud aware, because with cloud, you have that elasticity. I'm Swedish, Icelandic, so those words are really hard to me. Elasticity. Being able to move apps to other clouds and also expand on them. To just say, you know what, I need to expand my app to a different cloud or move them somewhere else. With WIF, I'm decoupling my applications from the infrastructure AD. Okay? Taste that one a little bit. So I'm decoupling from my infrastructure AD. What I'm saying is I'm losing the dependency on Active Directory in my applications. I'm providing my developers with a way to develop apps where they can develop them without always having to have an AD in place. So in theory, they could take the app and move it to public cloud, for example. Take an on-premise app, move it to public cloud. There are some recompilations to be done, but not a lot, right? So WIF is something that, if you're interested in it, you should actually look at some more data, more sessions during the week on that one. So let me do a demo of scenario number 5, or service number 5, before I hand over to Kenan. So what I have here is the third service that I didn't mention in the previous slide, is access control service. So think of a way where I want to do private and public cloud together. This is better together scenario for that scenario. So I have an application running, a web application running in my local data center. I have a need to allow my external partners to get access to that application. How would you do that today? Anyone? How would I provide an extranet for my external users? Open up the firewall over here. Yeah? Swiss cheese comes to mind. Put up an extranet, right? How many of you have an extranet Active Directory? Or an extranet LDAP directory? So what you are doing is you're managing your customer and your partner's identities. You're managing their usernames and their passwords in your AD. You're taking on ownership of their ADs, of their directory, of their identities. And you're also enforcing on them to remember a new identity. A new identity, new password, and all that. So with this one, I'm going to show you how you can integrate. I'm going to show you a scenario that integrates with service provider identities in the cloud. Basically, Facebook, Google, Windows Live ID, together with the service running on-premise. And since I'm not a developer, and I don't think you want to see code today, I'm going to say that if you want to see the code for all of this, I actually have the same demo set up in the booth downstairs. We can go into the nitty-gritty details of clicking demo on my switch. Wait, there we go. Okay, first of all, let's look at the application itself. This is a really complex application, just so you know. The application, you see it's down at the bottom, it's actually running, it's running on my on-premise machine. It's a virtualized VM running a simple web application. What it does now, it actually talks to my app and it goes out to the Windows Azure Access Control Service and asks for authentication. So my application is configured to trust claims that are coming from an access control service in the cloud. So what I get as a customer to this app is actually the option to log in with any of the different identity providers that I have configured in the cloud. So my app, this app that I have, I'm going to show it to you. Wow. I worked on it really, really long. You seen that one before? It's called Hello World, but it's the my ASP.NET version of Hello World. The app itself, I actually did one more thing in there. I threw in a little visualizer to see what the claims are that you can throw in. The app itself, this application, if I change the identity provider, so here I'm actually providing access to the Windows Live Google ID and Yahoo. If Yahoo, Google, or Windows Live change their APIs, no changes need to happen in this world. Everything is driven through Access Control Service in the cloud. So I go up there and look at how this is configured. So the Access Control Service portal is where I configure my identity providers. Sorry, sign in again. So I configure my identity providers. I just say I want Google, I want Windows Live ID. I can click Add, and add, for example, Facebook or an ADFS integration in there. I put up my relying party application, which is the application that I'm running on premise. And I just tell that application that, you know what? You come from here, you should go to that application. So if an application comes in, a request comes in, and I look at it, the realm or where the request is coming from, and it will send back a claim based on this. Okay? And I enable which identity providers are being used for that application themselves. So that's why I see all my different applications up there. Identity providers in there. Then I have a rule group which defines how do I take the attributes from Google, Yahoo, and Windows Live and transform them into one claim type and one claim with a set of, one token with a set of claims in it that is sent to the application. So depending on how Yahoo and email use name and email address and all the different attributes that they have, I take all that and I transform it into a common format that the app can use. So the app doesn't understand what really comes from Google and the others. They just understand what comes from ACS. And in here, I've even done a little bit of tricky configuration of a specific claim. If the name identifier from Windows Live is this specific tag, this specific line, then I will send the claim role with the title administrator. Okay? That's why, when I go here, I get this red section at the top. It's just in the code I just said, if role equals administrator, then highlight red. That's the ASP.NET code behind it, basically. So if I log in with another user, I'm not going to see that. So not just does ACS transform stuff from Google, Yahoo, it also gives you an option to modify roles and streamline roles and simplify roles and simplify attributes in a way before they get presented to this application. Okay? All of this that I've done is actually part of the Windows Identity Training Kit. So if you go to Bing, you search for Windows Identity Training Kit or Identity Training Kit only, you'll find the demo, the codes, and everything is available for you to test out yourself.
All right. All right. Go a little higher. Can you hear me in the back? So with identity, that's like the first step when you're trying to marry that self-service user down to the underlying infrastructure, whether that cloud's on premises or not. You need to know that you're talking to the right person. Once that person is enabled and accessing the activity, whatever it is the application you want them to access, then to really gain benefits of the cloud, especially with managing the cloud, you need to add process automation. You need to understand what that user is doing, and when that user asks for something, you need to quickly be able to provide it, and the best way to do that is through automation. That way you don't have to worry about somebody making a mistake or taking the time, missing the email that said, hey, I need to do this. When you can highly automate things, whether it's accessing activities on premises or it's going up to the cloud, you can gain advantages as far as managing your applications in the cloud, whether it's local or in public cloud. So with Apalus, who here uses Apalus today? Who here is familiar with Apalus? Okay, a few of you, great. Apalus was an acquisition we made about a year ago. Now it's probably a year and a half ago, where we can build in workflows, automated workflows for certain activities that happen. Maybe a user wants to request more cloud services. Who here saw the keynote? Hopefully everyone, great. When Joey asked for more resources, it kicked off a workflow within Apalus to check to see whether he had access, and then if he did have access, check to see whether he was authorized, whether we had enough resources available on that cloud, and then was able to provision him to access that cloud. That's great when it's local and on-premise on your private cloud. But what if it's Windows Azure and I need a new Windows Azure subscription? Well, you could do the same thing. You could request, if you saw on that list of requests, one of the requests was request Windows Azure subscription. And at that point, it would either connect him to an existing Windows Azure subscription that you already own, or maybe he wants a brand new one and he could choose a new Windows Azure subscription. It would then set up the certs. Anything you can do to automate those pieces of the task. In that one, you probably wouldn't want to automate it. You'd want to have it approved. Some guy go up to Windows Azure, get the subscription, bring it down, feed that information back into Apalus. Then they could go and finish off and set it up in Project Codename Concero. Process automation gives you that glue that can hook these services across clouds together. Let's say I had a service like Service 5 that Brian was talking about, where I had an application partially on premises and partially up in Windows Azure. Well, today, and with a lot of our 2012 tools, we manage this application that's totally running in one service or totally running in another cloud. But Apalus could be a tool that could stitch those things together. What if that service was running and I had both of those services within my Project Codename Concero and I wanted to stop that service? Well, I could stop the service I could make a request via Service Manager to stop the service. Apalus could pick it up, and then it knows that service is made up of a piece on premises and a piece up in the cloud, and it can automatically stop both of them for you. Now, eventually, our tools will just be able to do it within one tool, but for now, you can use Apalus to stitch all these things together. The next thing is service management. I have this automation, but I need to create the proper processes to ensure that I'm following the correct regulatory agencies, or I'm ensuring that it's going to follow the same steps. Who here went to Ryan O'Hara's session earlier today on management? So he was talking about some extreme standardization and creating tickets for everything, very highly controlled. Well, he went to and drove on site to try and drive on site to our data center in, where's our data center in Washington? What's it called?
I can't remember.
Oh, great. It's just on the other side of the Cascades. But he went over there and he just thought he could just walk in. But he couldn't just walk into that data center because it has such controls on it. They had to create an exception, go create a ticket for him, let him go do his tour that he wanted to do, and then he had to make sure he walked on a specific path, and when he was done, then they closed the ticket and he wasn't allowed in again. I mean, there's that extreme, the control that you need when you're running in the cloud, because as you move to the right, you got to trust whoever's providing you the service that they give you what you need. In other words, on the left, if I'm managing everything, then maybe I don't need control because I can do it all myself. You guys probably do it all yourself for a lot of these things. But as I start moving into infrastructure as a service, where a business unit or an app owner, he's going to get the application from the OS up, but I, as IT, I'm going to manage the underlying physical infrastructure. There's got to be some trust between these two, between us and them, that makes sure that we have provided the correct service level. And to do that, we need the control. We need the process and the automation. So there's some things about service management in this environment, and that is you want to make it so that it just works. You want to make it so that people can get their job done. They can create the tickets. You can get them routed to the right person. You can get them created, fixed. You want to be proactive. You want to ensure that you have the proper resources available, so when that next app owner comes and says, hey, I need resources, I can provide those resources. Building compliance into your services by understanding the regulatory agencies for these services, whether they're on-premises or up in the cloud, up in the public cloud. Their big part there is where's the data stored and who owns the data. Data sovereignty issues still are questionable in the cloud. And if you can't get to your data, you need to ensure that you're going to have access to it if something happens like the floods in Mississippi or something like that, where you need to ensure that you can get to your data even if your business isn't available to run anymore. Those are types of things that you need to build in with your process and your service management. There are a couple of things that to be aware of within your service management. As you move up the stack, what you're responsible for lessens, meaning that I'm not responsible for, as an app owner, for the physical servers or the networking or storage. I'm only responsible for the application or maybe the OS as well. But that means I have to trust that other person, whoever's providing that. And if I can't gain that trust, I can't get the information, then I won't be able to do that. The other thing is that if you use Windows Azure today, do you have all of the processes in place so that when a person within your company creates an application on Windows Azure, it connects back into your network in a proper way so that it doesn't expose you to any risks or anything like that. So building controls into that is very, very important. So again, when you're talking about things like IaaS, infrastructure as a service, you don't have to worry about the physical infrastructure, but you definitely still have to worry about the app, and you have to gain that trust. Provisioning in the cloud. When I have a service I want to deploy, I have to provision it out to the different business units. And I can do that a couple of ways. On premises, or even if I have a dedicated hosted environment, I would use VMM 2012 to provision that service. With that, we can create these cloud abstractions within VMM, and I can dole out the resources to the individual users as they see fit. I manage the capacity underneath with VMM, but I can delegate access for these user roles, and I can use Active Directory for that. If it's not in a private cloud situation, if it's in a public cloud situation, then I would use something like Project Codename Concero to manage it. But here, because of how VMM is designed and architected, we have different rule scopes so that you can create this logical abstraction between the users who are managing the services and the users who are managing the underlying infrastructure. The VMM admin, or the delegated admin, they manage the underlying fabric and can also manage servers on top of that and services on top of that. The self-service user, that's the person that only has access to the cloud services and can deploy start, stop services, but they can't touch that underlying fabric. System Center Project Codename Concero is also something that can bridge the gap across these different clouds. So Project Codename Concero, with the initial release, is focusing on on-premises VMM management. In other words, I can manage your VMM servers. And I say servers, multiple servers, not just one VMM server. So if I have a cloud that's assigned to me at my server here in Atlanta and another cloud assigned to me at my server over in England, I can manage both of those clouds and deploy services to either of those clouds from within the same Project Codename Concero. But it also helps you manage the Windows Azure subscriptions. One of the nice things about this is that if I have multiple Windows Azure subscriptions, I can take a service that's deployed in one of those Windows Azure subscriptions, and I can move it and copy it and paste it to the other Windows Azure subscription. So what that means is this. Let's say I have a development environment up in Windows Azure, and I'm doing all my testing, and I'm done testing, and it's ready to go to production. Well, I don't have access to the production subscription. So what I do is I call up my admin, or I create a change request, or an incident request, or a service request inside of Service Manager and say, hey, can you please move that service and copy it over to the production Windows Azure subscription? So that way IT can maintain that centralized control of the production environment, but we can let our devs develop those applications and get them up and ready to go. And then he can go in and drag and drop that service from the first Azure subscription to the second. The nice thing is if I have a service in the Atlanta data center and I want to run that service in the England data center, I can again, with Project Codename Concero, I can drag and drop that service from one cloud within VMM to another cloud within the same or a separate VMM. So I have that capability within Project Codename Concero. So there's a session on Wednesday morning about Project Codename Concero. I recommend you looking at it because this thing will expand. It's just now talking about on-premises, private cloud, and Windows Azure, but there's basically a lot of things we can do with it as we improve the product. So I'm going to do a little demo of that and show you a little bit about the cloud management. If I do this right, it worked. Excellent. So this is Project Codename Concero. It's very similar to the look and feel we saw at the keynote that Joey showed earlier today. But one of the things I wanted to do, I'm not going to show you how to deploy a service and look at a service because you all saw those things. But what I do want to do is show you within the library how I can move a service from one Azure subscription to another. And what I would do is click on the libraries, and what it's going to do is going to go and look at all the different libraries and get the different library resources that I have access to on premises as well as up in the cloud. And if I scroll these down, I see that I have some in the Windows Azure subscription. And I have these two Azure subscriptions, Test and Public. So like that example I said earlier, when he asks, can you move it from Test to production, I can click on the Test cloud here and look at the services that I have there and take the packages of those services and pull them out and copy them and then drop them into the production server. Right now it's connecting up to Windows Azure, grabbing all the cloud information from there. And it looks like it's not finding anything on that one. But I see one in here. So let's go the opposite way. I've been running in production. Now I want to develop that next version of it. So I'm going to move that application back to test so that they can start developing that. So I see that I have this storage repository called VJ Test Storage. And inside of there, I would have the services available to me. Once this thing comes up and these files come up, I should be able to then copy and paste them. If it doesn't work in a couple seconds, we'll try something else.
That's why it's not released yet, right?
Well, it's not that. It's trying to connect to Azure, so it depends on how long it's grabbing the data. So anyway, that is how I would do it. And unfortunately, I don't have the. It's not cooperating with us today because it is going to public cloud. Maybe you can see one in here now. Nope, it's not coming up. All right, so I'm going to flip back because I don't want to.
I'll keep.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I'm just going to come back from here. All right, so that was what you would do. I mean, you can see the different services. You can create those different services. If you had a service that was on-premise and a service that was in a public Windows Azure subscription and they were talking together, you could basically create you could create two services, one for the the private cloud, one for Windows Azure, deploy them at the same time, and then you would have to stitch them together and manage them at the same time. But it's one way that you can do this hybrid cloud across cloud environments. If we talk about monitoring in the cloud, your applications that you're running, you need to ensure that they're there, that they're getting the resources that they need, and that you're providing access to those different resources. So what we have is we have a Windows Azure Management Pack. And this Windows Azure Management Pack allows you to look at different pieces of your Windows Azure subscription or that Azure workload that's being deployed and see how it's running. So on the left-hand side, if you're familiar with Operations Manager, you can see that I have this Windows Azure subscription, and I have these capabilities. And one of the things that I want to look at is the performance of my application or the availability. The other thing I could do is I could just right-click on one of these applications, this Bid Now worker role, and then I could see what's happening with that Bid Now worker role. So when the Health Explorer comes up, it's going to show me that, yeah, I have green check marks. Everything's running fine within that application. I'm not hitting performance issues. I'm not hitting availability issues. So you can monitor your Windows Azure applications, and those Windows Azure applications here can be part of a distributed application that spans multiple clouds. So this piece of the Bid Now application is running up in Windows Azure. Maybe the SQL database is running local, and I can have that all within one big distributed application. And I could click down and drive down into the Windows Azure piece and monitor the health of that, or I could monitor the health of the on-premises private cloud piece as well. The other thing we can do is we can monitor the application itself. We can look at what's happening as that application is running, and we can determine maybe what's wrong with that application while it's running and correct it. Who here finds a problem with an application and tells their dev guys, hey, there's a problem with that application, and the dev guy says, yeah, it's a problem with your server. It's pretty much the first thing they say, right? Who here then looks at the server and says, no, the server is running great, it's a problem with your application, and the guy says, no, it's a problem with your server. That's pretty much how that question and answer period goes. With AdviCode, I can look at and drill down into that application and find out where the problem may be occurring, and then be able to pass specific information to my devs so that the devs can not only say it's not a problem with my code, but when you give them the fact that, oh, it's this SQL call, then they can say, oh, I guess it is a problem with my code. So this Dinner Now application, basically it's running a little bit slow. In other words, when I try to hit save to cart, it's just not saving into my cart. So I can look at the application, and with a rich dashboard, I can see a lot of different pieces. I can look at the performance of the application, request times. Seems like request is going pretty good. But I do have this critical error here, and I can drill down into it and find out what's going on. So if I drill down into this application here, what I see, I can look at the diagram view of this application, and some of this piece could be running on premises, some of this piece could be running up on Windows Azure, or even on a hosted provider or whatever. And I can see that, oh, it's this registration group that's having problems, and it's causing my application to perform slowly. Well, if I click down into that piece of the application, I can see, well, this call is taking almost 7 seconds right here. If we look, it's taking 6.6 seconds. And in my code, in my normal operation, this thing is supposed to take less than 2. So there's something going on with this application right here. Well, I need to drill down into it. So I can expand down into the calls that this .NET application is creating, and I can look and find that, oh, it's a SQL call that's having a problem. Oh, it's this exact SQL call right here. And I can copy that information. And under this Actions tab, which you can barely see up here on the top, I could copy this information and send it to my dev folks as an HTML. I could print screen this page and send it. I could do whatever I need to get them the information to show, hey, it's in your code. It's not a problem with my hardware. Or if nothing here was running bad and these codes were running okay, you could look at Ops Manager and look at the underlying hardware and say, oh, yeah, oh, whoops, it was my network. It was a bad cable in my network or something. And you could switch it and solve the problem that way. But you have that information. The problem is that with these applications, especially with AdviCode in the initial state that it's in right now, It monitors great for .NET type applications. For a lot of other things, it treats as basically a black box. So it can look at Java, it can monitor a Java type application, but it really monitors the in and the out. It can't instrument and go into the middle part of that application. With Windows Azure applications as well, it treats it the same way. Because we're not running AviCode on top of that machine inside the worker role or the web role, we can treat the calls as they go into and out of Windows Azure and treat that as a black box. But we can gather where that problem is occurring. Is it occurring between communications between the local host and the Windows Azure subscription, or is it something that's happening just totally up in Windows Azure? So we can determine and find where that problem is. Then we'll still have to work with dev to figure out how we can solve that problem. The other thing, and Brian mentioned it earlier today, when you have multiple cloud environments, with management, we're not only deploying and managing applications in the cloud, but we're using the cloud to help with management. So Windows Intune, which has been released, it was available starting at MMS, so in the middle of March. We are able to monitor an organization's desktops and make sure that they're up to date with things like patches, make sure that they're managed appropriately and they have proper things like virus scan and those types of things turned on. And we use the cloud ourselves within Microsoft to provide that service for our customers. So with management, with System Center, we're not just looking at managing services running in the cloud, but we're looking at using the cloud to help you guys manage your applications and services there. The same thing with System Center Advisor. System Center Advisor is also looking at your local servers, but it's using the cloud to store that information and running in the cloud. All right. So the last piece I want to talk about today is protection in the cloud. And what protection means is, how do I ensure that these applications are up? How do I ensure that my data is safe? And one of the tools we have within System Center is System Center Data Protection Manager. And with this System Center Data Protection Manager, we've done a lot to build in some cloud principles and take advantage of the fact that you may have locally multiple clouds, or you may want to leverage the cloud as being the repository for your backup data. So within Data Protection Manager, we have the ability for DR to back up our systems to the DPM server, but then what we do is we use DPM to DPM backup for our disaster recovery plan. So what that means is that as I've finished backing up, say, a SQL server running over there on my production cloud, I back it up across to a different geographic location via DPM, and I have the data stored. Now, it gives me two benefits. One, it's off-site. So now I don't have to worry about taking and driving tapes or having some white truck come and pick up the tapes and drive them around anywhere. But the other thing is that DPM also, if I lose that DPM server that's in the production site, I can fail over to this backup DPM server, meaning that if that server itself fails, the physical servers or the VMs over there on the production site will back up directly to this other DPM server. So it's chaining support too. So I can back up this DPM with that DPM. I can back up that DPM with another one, and then another one back to the original one. So I can do some chaining techniques to get offsite backup for all my different data centers. The other thing we've done is we've worked with different cloud providers to provide solutions so that you can alleviate backing things up to tape and then taking those tapes and having somebody come and pick them up and drive them around. Or creating, and by using techniques like online snapshots, we can create a lot more copies of them. But we've been working with companies like Iron Mountain, where you can do a DPM backup directly to the cloud, and Iron Mountain will accept your data and store it in backup for you. So if you're already using Iron Mountain as your backup tool today, as far as your offsite tape backup recovery today, why don't I just move it to the cloud, back it up directly to them, instead of having to have a white truck come and pay for that expense and the fact that the guy is going to drive by a hamburger shop, go get a hamburger, and somebody's going to take my tapes or something from there. If I can back it up directly to the cloud, then if I have a problem, I can recover from there back to the original server data center, or if I lose that data center, I can recover to another data center and get back up and running very quickly. And they have mirrored data centers because they're a cloud provider in that respect. So a lot we were talking about today was how do I get that infrastructure, whether it's on-premises or it's running in the cloud, whether it's hosted by Windows Azure or it's running at a hosting provider, and how do I map them and get that resources to my self-service user that I've identified? And to do that, we use techniques like process automation and IT service management. We want to make sure that we can provision that server, monitor it, and protect it, and bringing that all together. And that's what System Center is doing today. And what you'll see over time is that we'll cover more and more and more of those scenarios that we've talked about. So with that, I think it's about time for beer. If you guys have any questions, we'll be up here. It's not there.